time for us to play chess, not checkers. It's about making decisions that will affect us as human beings, our careers, our next generations to come. Did you know that it is now a crime to be homeless? Pay attention. It's not a secret. Look it up. They are attacking our most vulnerable citizens. The Project 2025 plan is not a game. Look it up.
Oh, I love that she did that. Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in the East. No, it's not a game, and this is not a drill. Project 2025 is their plan. It is serious. It's in writing. It's public. It is a chilling approach to running our federal government that got all the more chilling after the Supreme Court granted Donald Trump absolute immunity. It's the plan that Trump would implement on day one should he prevail in the November election and end up back in the Oval Office. That was actress Taraji P. Henson delivering that warning during Sunday's BET Awards to make sure that her audience and all Americans wake up about what is truly at stake this November. A full-scale reimagining of our entire system of government and who runs it in Donald Trump's image and vision. The mission statement for Project 2025 is a plan assembled by the Heritage Foundation. Sounds like something you'd read on the ex-president's Truth Social feed, and there's no evidence to rebut that that's exactly where it came from. Quote, "It is not enough for conservatives to win elections. If we are going to rescue the country from the grip of the radical left, we need both a governing agenda and the right people in place, ready to carry this agenda out on day one of the next conservative administration." Axios has new reporting on what they describe as Trump's imperial presidency in waiting, writing this, quote, "Trump promises an unabashedly imperial presidency, one that would turn the Justice Department against critics, deport millions of people in the U.S. illegally, slap 10% tariffs on thousands of products, fire perhaps tens of thousands of government staff deemed insufficiently loyal. He'd stretch the powers of the presidency in ways not seen in our lifetime. He says this consistently and clearly, so it is not conjecture." A few other headlines from Project 2025's 900-page-plus mandate, putting Christianity at the center of American life and government. Criminalizing the mailing of abortion medication, the most common form of abortion care, criminalizing sending that through the mail. Taking the word abortion out of all laws, policies, and regulations, as well as terms relating to gender and sexual identity. Removing protections for the environment, denying climate change, eliminating the Department of Education. As the New Republic called it a few months back, quote, "a remarkably detailed guide to turning the United States into a fascist paradise." And now, after yesterday's seismic ruling from the Supreme Court that an American president has immunity for all official acts, there is legally no limit to what Trump will do and can do. It's where we start the hour. It's where we'll start this hour every day, as long as there is news to share on this front with our favorite experts and friends. Writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter, is here. President of Media Matters for America, Angelo Carasone, is here. Former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama, Ben Rhodes, is here. And Democratic strategist and professor at Columbia University, MSNBC political analyst Basil Smikle is here. Amanda Carpenter, I start with you. It's taken the media a minute. We're behind the great Taraji P. Henson. But I think that the Supreme Court decision has focused the minds of the media, I hope. We're going to try to get through a lot of it. It's about 600 pages long. But tell us what you first sort of seized upon. I know you've been looking at Project 2025 for a long time.
Yeah, and I have. And I also think it's important to show how it's directly tied to the Trump campaign agenda, because I think it's almost too easy for Trump to dismiss it by saying, oh, that's an outside group. And so what I did through my work at Protect Democracy with my wonderful colleagues was put together this resource called the Authoritarian Playbook 2025. And you can find that at authoritarianplaybook2025.org, that talks through the systematic ways that the Trump campaign agenda overlaps and collaborates with Project 2025 in distinct ways that would dismantle our democracy. And that sounds like really exaggerated, but it is not. And so we went through and really tried to explain in a factual, no nonsense way about how this goes down. And we've divided it up to several areas. The first has to do with how Trump will consolidate power to direct investigations against his enemies. There's a lot of material that, policy wise, the Project 2025 agenda lays out how they will systematically do that. That allows his loyalists to engage in lots of regulatory retaliation, putting the tariffs against his enemies, things that he really experimented with in his first term and trying to double the shipping rates of Amazon to punish Jeff Bezos. That clears the decks for that kind of stuff. And so that's where things you'll hear about Schedule F and these purges of civil servants come into play, because they're going to need a lot of people to do that. And Project 2025 has a big job resource bank to vet people to be ready to go on day one. But probably the most alarming things have to do with consolidation of power at the military. We're talking about federal law enforcement overreach when Trump says something that he thinks that shoplifters should be shot on the spot. And then policy-wise, he promised to indemnify law enforcement who overreaches so that they cannot be held accountable. You talk about the domestic deployment of the military, abuse of the Insurrection Act, and you couple all this with an unfettered pardon power, which he's already shown that he has a penchant to abuse in the ways that he's already pardoned his political loyalists and allies. And so this all adds up in the end game, which is always the authoritarian end game, is that they don't leave, right? Because once you consolidate all this power, you can't give it up. And so that's where this always goes. So if people want to check that out, we really did our best to distill it in a clear, easy, factual explanation, because if you look at Project 2025, it is a lot to go through. So let's look about where this intersects, get really focused on the ways that our democracy will be threatened, because that's the quickest way we can get to some solutions in terms of maybe, putting some more guardrails in place when it comes to Congress. Because, Nicole, I think we've learned from this process, we can't keep banking everything on the next election and the next presidency. People have to get to work and get creative now.
Well, what is the solution other than making sure that Trump is never president again and can't put this into action, Amanda?
Well, for starters, I think we've seen the slide of SCOTUS supersizing the presidency for quite some time. And obviously, this immunity ruling is a wake-up call. I think this is to be a time for, Democrats in Congress to really get smart and savvy about reining in executive power before it's too late. I understand that legislation probably can't be passed right now, but this is a good time to start building the case for it. Instead of breaking out about what's going to happen to the presidency, use the power that you have now to build that message, to talk to people, to get solutions. Because I don't want to come off as lecturing as like a Republican that's on here saying Democrats need to do more. But it is my feeling now that MAGA is on the rise, just simply because they're out working everybody on a lot of fronts. Yes, the courts have let us down, the Republican Party has let us down, but they are not stopping. And so I think we need a lot less panicking and a lot more working.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, there is this thing. I described it to David Jolly in the last hour as, I am a guest in the Democratic coalition. I don't plan on leaving. I'm like the House guest that won't leave. But there is this sense that Republicans with the most malevolent and malignant leader and the most rotten set of enablers have done too much damage. I mean, who is the Democratic Leonard Leo? Who is the writing the pro-democracy Project 2020? And I actually asked 5 people. I got 5 different answers. 1 is the Constitution. 2 is WhiteHouse.gov. Who is sort of sitting in the quarterback chair to give Joe Biden's vast pro-democracy agenda its marching orders to try to push back against what is, malevolent and malignant are the only words I can come up with to describe Trump's plan for a second term.
Yeah, I think you're right to focus on the question, Nicole, and I'm going to get to it. I just want to make one point about Project 2025 that builds on your point about parties, which is sometimes we make the mistake of just thinking, this is just Trump, and Trump's going to come in and somehow this is all emanating from his own interests. When in fact, if you look at that Supreme Court decision, that's the result of decades of court packing by the far right and a relentless focus on the courts, such that we really have no solution right now in the near term for dealing with a 6-3 majority that is changing the Constitution before our very eyes. And so I think we have, first of all, have to make a change now we think about this. It's not just Trump. Trump obviously is the most corrosive force on the party itself, but he's connecting with the worst elements in the party that have been building this authoritarian playbook for some time. And we've seen this, as you and I have talked about, in other countries. In terms of who's pushing back, I would point to the necessity of taking action, not just at the federal level, because you pointed out in your last question, it's difficult. If Trump wins and the Democrats don't control both houses of Congress, well, we'd be dealing with an out-of-control president and a Supreme Court giving him a blank check. Some of the fortification you have to do and some of the groundwork you have to do is at the local and state level. And this has been the case in other countries that have had to try to create antibodies to resist authoritarianism. I think some of the more innovative democratic policy work, both around democracy and around solutions that matter in people's lives, are happening across the country in different states and municipalities. In the first Trump presidency, frankly, his decision just to take climate change, which is one of the examples you used from Project 2025, his decision to pull out of the Paris Agreement did not have that big of an impact in terms of American emissions because a lot of states, California leading them, built their own guardrails around the capacity of the federal government to undo their actions. And so I think part of what the Democratic Party needs to do is not just have a kind of top-down thing where we're waiting for the next presidential election every 4 years with bated breath, although we have to do that, particularly in the next few months. But we need to be building from the bottom up in the same way that the Republican Party has. What are we doing at city levels, at town levels, at state levels? What are we doing with grassroots mobilization? The Democratic Party, Nicole, has a lot of infrastructure. I've been a part of that infrastructure. It's not always connected to each other. Sometimes it's disconnected. Mm-hmm. There's an environmental movement. There's a movement for reproductive freedom. There's a movement for LGBT rights. This all needs to be woven together in the same way that the right-wing coalitions have been. And so we need that kind of collective effort in everything that we're doing, not just for this election, but frankly, it's going to take a generation just to undo what's already been done. And never mind if Trump gets back in there again.
So picture this scene. In February of 2017, 1 month into his presidency, I'm visiting President Trump in the Oval Office for the first time. And it's truly awe-inspiring. He's showing me all around and pointing to different paintings. And he says to me something to the effect of, "Don't worry, Michael, your January and February reimbursement checks are coming." They were FedExed from New York, and it takes a while for that to get through the White House system. As he promised, I received the first check for the reimbursement of $70,000 not long thereafter.
Who among us is surprised that after yesterday, the ex-president is now building a case to argue that his newfound complete immunity means he cannot be convicted for criminal conduct that took place while he was sitting on a chair in the Oval Office, like the thing he did that Michael Cohen describes here, writing checks for reimbursements for hush money paid to an adult film actress and then concealing them, lying about them as legal expenses, the thing he was convicted of 34 felony counts for. While having some success, this afternoon, Judge Juan Merchan agreed to delay Donald Trump's sentencing that was scheduled for next Thursday in the Manhattan case until at the earliest September 18th, which would now put it after the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention, and it would land about a month and a half before the presidential election. Donald Trump's lawyers asked for time to file a motion to get his 34-count guilty verdict thrown out, citing the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity. It would be an argument prosecutors say without merit that, in the meantime, has clearly set up another delay in Trump's pre-election legal challenges. Joining our conversation, New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig, an MSNBC legal analyst and a former criminal division deputy chief at the Southern District of New York, Christy Greenberg, is back. Suzanne Craig, it feels like a million lifetimes ago that we sat every day together at 4 and covered this trial. But, you had a feeling when the Supreme Court handed down absolute immunity for President Trump, it was a case brought by President Trump, that everything had changed. And when I saw the news this morning about the New York case, it is clear that that is also Trump's view, that everything has changed.
Right. And the hush money case where he's now facing a sentencing, most of it involved his conduct in 2016 prior to him taking office. But there were a number of things that happened at the White House that are now going to come under a new light. And I think, like everybody today, I made a list of all of those things. I probably didn't get them all, but there was a lot of conduct that did spill over into the White House. You played the tape of Michael Cohen, and that was one where the checks were signed and they had a discussion about the checks coming. That was just one. And the other one I think was really important was that conversation that he had with Hope Hicks, where they were talking about Michael Cohen and the payment, and Donald Trump said, well, it's better it comes out now than prior to the election. And that was a conversation that happened at the White House. Some other ones I wrote down, there were tweets involving Michael Cohen, there was call logs, there was conversations that he had in the White House, there were speeches, there was a public disclosure form that he had to make where he disclosed the payment to Michael Cohen. And then there was that famous April 2018 press conference right aboard Air Force One, where he denied knowing about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels. I'm sure I have missed some, and we don't know, I guess, but you can't imagine all these are going to fall under official conduct, but I can assure you that Donald Trump's lawyers made the same list and are going to be going through it and are going to be making a very, from their point of view, a very strong case to the judge that a lot of this should fall under official conduct and that the verdict should be set aside.
You know, Christy, I've said on the show that I really, if I'd known I was going to cover someone like Donald Trump, I would have sought to obtain a law degree in some manner. But tell me how I mean, I know all those things, I know where they happened, but how is it anything official to have sex in Tahoe with Stormy Daniels and then engage in collusion with David Pecker and then pay Michael Cohen fake, falsely accounted monies to keep Stormy Daniels quiet? Which part of the conduct is official?
So none of what you just said would be considered official. I completely agree with you. But I do think, as Sue was going through that list, that is a list where at least some of those acts could be considered official. The one that I focused on was the same one that Sue mentioned, that witness testimony with Hope Hicks in 2018 when she was the White House communications director. And they were talking about how it is, for example, that the Stormy Daniels story was playing. Under this opinion from the Supreme Court, they could say that discussion between Donald Trump, then president, and his advisor constitutes an official act. And then use of any evidence pertaining to an official act, even though the charges are completely related to unofficial acts, any use of evidence pertaining to the official act should not have been admitted at this trial. So you're going to see the prosecutors and Donald Trump's lawyers going through each of these potential acts, whether they're official or not, with a fine-tooth comb. And then if they are official acts and they shouldn't have been admitted, then the question becomes, well, how important was this evidence? Was it really significant? Like that Hope Hicks testimony, that moment was significant, but was it cumulative? For example, we heard similar testimony from David Pecker saying that he had a conversation with Donald Trump about the fact that he was happy that the Karen McDougal story didn't come out, and that happened in the White House. Well, you know, David Pecker is not a White House advisor. David Pecker is a private party, so that's arguably not official. So you're going to look at these, are they official acts? And then if they are, did it really make or break the case? Or was it something where there was just so much evidence in this case that is not something you can point to and say, we throw out the whole thing? And so given just how much strong evidence they had, I really don't think this is going to change the game, but it is going to take some time, and the judge and the parties are going to be really combing through this record carefully to see if there's any evidence that would make a difference.
Sue, it is an extraordinary delay. Everything about the calendar this year is extraordinary, and it's been rescheduled for mid-September. Do you have any sense or any reporting that holds, or does that feel pretty loosely placed on the calendar?
I just think we don't know. I mean, something could bump it again. I mean, this is now, we're getting into justice delayed territory. I didn't think that the July 11th date was going to move, but this certainly is just, it's just recast everything. So I don't think we know, but it is significant because whatever happens, this is the first criminal conviction of a former president. That sentencing was going to go ahead, next week, and now it's moved into September, just weeks before this immensely consequential election, and it could get moved again. We just don't know. It's going to be a crazy fall. I think we're going to be talking a lot.
I also want to retread some history with you, Barbara McQuade. I mean, this is out today in the Washington Post. Former Nixon White House counsel John Dean said Monday that had the court's ruling been enforced in the early 1970s, history could have turned out very differently. Quote, as I looked at it, I realized Richard Nixon would have had a pass because the evidence against him was based on official acts the Supreme Court has deemed immune from prosecution. You can almost erect an alternate history, right? I mean, this is an extraordinary fork in the road for everyone in this country, everyone who I think if they knew much about or they knew a lot or they knew a little about the Constitution, they knew that one of our values was that no one was above the rule of law. After yesterday, one person is, the American president.
Yeah, and when the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, what they're saying is this is what it said all along. This is what the Founding Fathers meant when they wrote this more than 200 years ago. That certainly wasn't the understanding, however, during the Watergate era. As you know, Nicole, a big part of that case was the allegations that Richard Nixon had ordered the CIA to try to dissuade the FBI from investigating the burglary at the Watergate office building. That is absolutely an official act. And so under today's standard, the opinion decided yesterday, not only could President Nixon not have been charged for that order, you couldn't even use that as evidence. And so it really calls into question the consistency between yesterday's decision and the U.S. versus Nixon case, where the tapes were ordered to be turned over. If Nixon couldn't be charged with the crime, then how can you force him to turn over evidence of a crime that cannot be prosecuted? It really does, I think, put into stark relief just how questionable yesterday's decision really is. One of my least favorite portions of the opinion is where Chief Justice Roberts accuses the dissenters of engaging in fear-mongering, pointing out that as the dissenters do, that someone could order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a rival or accept a bribe in exchange for a pardon. But what he never says is that it's not true. He just says that these are extreme hypotheticals. But today, really, there is nothing that would mean that a president would be charged with a crime if he were to engage in that behavior. And I think the Watergate example really brings home what a stark difference this is in our understanding of how the Constitution has worked for these 200-some years.
David Jolly, a lot of people that I know and people that I don't, beloved viewers of this program, I saw people expressing fear. I'm afraid of what the court ushered in, but my colleague Rachel Maddow, as she is beloved for doing, had sort of cut right to the crux of this. Let me play that for you right now.
The rule of law is supposed to constrain the ruler. And the Supreme Court just undid that. And it's binding. And it's now the way our country is structured. And the only way out of this, the only fix to this, there's no fix to this that involves impeaching Supreme Court justices. There's no fix to this that involves a new argument or a new case. The only fix to this is to put someone in the White House from here on out who will not abuse the absolutely tyrannical power they have just been legally granted in perpetuity.
Do you agree with that? And what does that mean?
Yeah, I do. Look, Barb talked about the founders, and I think the founders did not envision a raw criminal or someone that would be willing to engage in unlawful behavior, truly unlawful behavior, occupying what appeared to be an office of great honor. And I think where the Chief Justice got it wrong, and Rachel gets it right, is it is plausible to imagine these scenarios. Look, I, as an attorney, come down, for those who followed the live breaking news yesterday, I'm more in the Chuck Rosenberg camp that this might not be as drastic as it seems, because unlawful behavior is still unlawful behavior, right? You could still, I think what Justice Roberts was saying, Chief Justice Roberts was saying is, if a president ordered SEAL Team 6 to engage in an assassination, that's unlawful and remains unlawful. However, where critics like Barb and Rachel and others are right to point out is it might be unlawful, but under yesterday's ruling, there's really no evidence you could enter into as a prosecutor that says the president engaged in this type of behavior because of that small portion of the decision that says any behavior that's determined to be part of an official act. And we're seeing it in New York today, where Trump's lawyer said any communication, even if it was to Michael Cohen or about a porn star or about behavior that occurred before the presidency, any communication of Donald Trump as president is in the outer shadows of the office and can't be used as evidence. That's the most restrictive part of this decision that would suggest a bad actor could engage in unlawful behavior as president and actually get away with it. That is the hardest part to reconcile here. And I think it's what you heard Joe Biden say last night. As he said, he would never abuse this office, but Donald Trump certainly would, and that makes November that much more important.
Well, I ran into Chuck Rosenberg yesterday, and I said, my only thought or reaction to that analysis is that we have someone with a blueprint for doing things that are illegal that's running as a criminal. I mean, Trump has a record, as Carol and other investigative journalists chronicled, of recoiling against people at DOJ who he didn't view as loyal to him. He fires Comey because he doesn't see to it to let Mike Flynn go. He makes Sessions cry because he recuses from the Russia case. What is he afraid of in all these interactions? Criminal scrutiny. That's it. That's the whole ball game. He hands out pardons to people who he wants to commit crimes for him or who did retroactively. So I guess the SEAL Team 6 maybe. I don't find it particularly far-fetched since they were chanting "Hang Mike Pence" and he cheered them on. But I mean, the reporting that I asked Carol about, where he wanted the Insurrection Act invoked, that was to use any means necessary to suppress protests after the murder of George Floyd. I feel like the thoughtful legal analysis almost doesn't recognize the brazen and public nature of Trump's extrajudicial ambitions.
Nicole, you're exactly right about something because of this. You mentioned in the lead the example, and Carol's reporting is that Don McGahn stopped Donald Trump from doing that. Don McGahn's not going to be in the next White House. Rudy Giuliani will be the next type of White House counsel who will not put the brakes on a President Trump.
Carol Leonnig, I want to give you the last word. What are your thoughts as you watch, our politics as topsy-turvy as they've ever been? The White House briefing was described to me as a feeding frenzy. I didn't catch it. We're going to speak to a White House official in the next block. The Supreme Court seemingly completely unmoored from precedent, tradition, and even traditional conservative stuff. And Donald Trump seeming to evade accountability at every turn.
In one respect, Nicole, this is exactly what I expected the Supreme Court ruling would be, with a few small nuanced differences, but absolute immunity for official acts is what I was watching come down the train track. And yet seeing it today and yesterday aligned with President Biden's faltering appearance in the debates, watching people call for him to step down or at least remove himself from this race. At the same time, Donald Trump, who showed himself to not treat the office with any reverence or real focused concern on his duty to the public and to the Constitution, seeing all these things circle at the same time is worrisome. As a young journalist, one of the things that I remember my mentors teaching me over and over again was, when you're reporting on public officials, what you're trying to figure out is your bar is not have they engaged in a crime. Your bar for reporting important stories is, are they meeting the high standards that we expect for public officials who will serve the public? And right now, it feels as though a lot of our institutions are so below that bar. We are writing and reporting on things that are momentous and disturbing. And it's so far afield from my early days of holding people to account to the highest possible standard. We have a president right now who's struggling to show that he can lead for another 4 years. We have an incoming front runner for re-election who is planning to wage war against his enemies, against anyone who's disloyal to him, not the standard for serving the public and the Constitution that I was trained to report on from the earliest days.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.